Okay, so continuing our discussion on Spider-Man Clone Saga, again, Spider-Man Clone Saga is 95% just fluff and like 5% important things that actually matter, which is kind of an interesting scenario. But in this one, we focus on Kaine. Now, here's the funny thing about this. Remember, Kaine was just this enigmatic cloak and dagger guy. We didn't really know anything about him until the story The Truth Is Out There, which is part of the trial of Peter Parker, which will actually be the next video that we do. Up until this point, Kaine was just this guy that just hounded the footsteps of Ben Reilly, hounded the footsteps of Peter Parker, and we didn't really know anything, which is kind of cool. It was kind of interesting to see him become such an enigma. But what this story does is it actually picks up prior to the events of a battle between Peter Parker and Vulture and so on, which actually led to Peter Parker being poisoned. Now, the funny thing about this is that this involves a character, of course, Dr. Octopus, but also involves a character named Stunner. Now, Stunner, I feel like we've talked about her, and I want to say it was in one of the Superior Spider-Man stories, but it may be that it was one of the Aftermath stories, I guess the Return of Peter Parker. I don't remember off the top of my head. I want to say that it was though, but on the off chance that we didn't talk about her, Stunner, as we see her here, is not actually what she looks like. Stunner is a chick who is kind of overweight, to be honest, and this is actually a technological body that allows her to walk around and look attractive. So it was actually kind of a weird scenario, but her and Dr. Octopus have formed at least as close to a relationship as you can have, and Stunner was genuinely in love with him, and he was genuinely in love with her. The funny thing about this though was that it allowed the character to basically kind of live out alongside Dr. Octopus, which meant that she was basically his cohort, partner in crime, so to speak. And the two of them would engage in some pretty nefarious activities in terms of committing crimes and so on and so forth. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that Dr. Octopus's love for Stunner will actually be his downfall. But the crazy thing about this is that following Peter Parker's exposure to this sort of chemical poison at the hands of the Vulture, Dr. Octopus is actually the one that's trying to work on him, trying to resurrect him. Now, again, this entire time, Aunt May is extremely sick and virtually on the verge of her deathbed, but funny enough, she'll actually recover. But again, this all really deals with the idea of Peter Parker on the verge of essentially dying. And so what ends up happening here is Peter Parker, of course, recovers temporarily. That is to say, Dr. Octopus basically says, look, here's a serum that will temporarily cure him, and then we're just gonna drop him off on a rooftop so he'll never know it was me that took care of him, which is kind of funny because Peter Parker just kind of wakes up and is like, yeah, I beat this virus, and that's really about it. Now, of course, again, Kaine constantly in the background, constantly watching things unfold, looking at Mary Jane Watson, looking at Stunner, these different characters, and just sort of watching these events progress. So what ends up happening here is in this really interesting moment, Dr. Octopus sort of leaves Mary Jane Watson and Peter Parker to their own affairs, where they both basically kind of run over things, that are going on with them and everything that's sort of happening. And what ends up taking place here is Mary Jane Watson reveals to Peter Parker that she's actually pregnant. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that by the time this story had happened, Mary Jane Watson had already become aware of the idea of Ben Reilly. There's a guy running around out there that's basically the clone of Peter Parker. In a lot of ways, Peter didn't really keep a whole lot of secrets from Mary Jane, and that's one of the reasons why so many people were upset about the fact that their marriage basically came to an end during one more day, because it was sort of a hallmark marriage in a lot of different ways, sort of your traditional landscape when it came to characters that were getting together. The other half of this is that as Peter Parker begins to regain his memories from his whole experience, and as the illness begins to come back down on him again, he basically realizes that Dr. Octopus was the one who saved his life. And so what ends up happening here is Peter Parker transitions and actually goes over to Dr. Octopus to try to bring him back. Now, this is kind of a rough situation just because of the fact that, remember, if you're Peter and one of your most notable enemies saves your life, you can't help but think that there's like a nefarious goal here, right? Like they're up to something, that there's some ulterior motive here. Now, for Dr. Octopus, that's true. That's exactly the case. He's not intending to kill Peter Parker. In the mind of Dr. Octopus, it's more of a pride thing. It's more of like Peter Parker is his main nemesis. And if anybody's going to kill Peter Parker, it's going to be Dr. Octopus. That's really the only motivation for why it is that he's doing this. In curing Spider-Man, Dr. Octopus knows his identity. He knows he's Peter Parker. Now, this put Marvel in a bit of a pickle, in a little bit of a predicament, because this is almost like the Civil War reveal before Civil War. For those of you guys that never read the Civil War comics, one of the biggest moments to take place in that story was when Peter Parker revealed his identity to the world, right? Like Iron Man came along, said, hey, look, man, you got to trust this Registration Act. I promise we'll keep your family and friends safe. You have to demonstrate to the world that you believe in it. Peter Parker unmasked himself and said, like, I'm a superhero who has definitively kept his identity hidden away from the rest of the world. Here's how much I believe in the Superhuman Registration Act. And then almost immediately after that happens, there's an attempt on the life of Aunt May. So again, it wasn't really, the best instance, but the fact remains that it was, another one of these scenarios where it puts Marvel in a pickle. After Spider-Man revealed his identity in Civil War, they had to put the cat back in the bag by having Doctor Strange issue this giant, spell more or less across the world that nobody would know the identity of Peter Parker unless unless he intentionally revealed it to them. Hence the whole reason with Spider Island and those events that unfolded and so on and so forth. But with regards to this, it's very similar. If Dr. Octopus knows the secret identity of Peter Parker, this is on a much smaller scale from Civil War, then how does Marvel in turn answer that? How do they counter with that? Well, of course, we'll end up finding out as the story unfolds. But again, something to keep in mind, Kaine in the background, watching events unfold. And this is how we saw him for a bulk of the story, for a majority of the Clone Saga story. A lot of it really just revolved around Ben Reilly and Spider-Man, Peter Parker, really just kind of emphasized them and emphasized their own individual stories, how they were dealing with everything. Because remember, in our last video, when we talked about Ben Reilly, we basically established that with him coming to terms with Peter Parker, he had gone forward as his own superhero in the form of Scarlet Spider. It was a way for Marvel to begin the process of sort of removing Peter Parker from the equation and putting Ben Reilly in his place. Now, of course, with Peter Parker going back to Dr. Octopus and essentially saying, look, you got to help me cure this, you got to help me get rid of this poison or this virus, Dr. Octopus helps him. Dr. Octopus is able to help him, eliminate this illness. And in the process, Peter kind of has these visions where he sees Uncle Ben and he encounters his biological parents and different things like that. He experiences Norman Osborn, his various villain bases and different things like that. And again, this is part of that whole aspect of, the last thing you see before you die, your life kind of flashing before your eyes. But it's also a reminder to Peter Parker of all the things that he hasn't done, of all of his shortcomings, the failures that he's made over the course of his life, because in a lot of ways, this was designed to say goodbye to Peter. Now, this would not be the means by which Marvel would try to write him out, not at all. Instead, it would be something a little more organic and a little more visceral. But again, this is one of those things, the 5 people you see before you die, when your life flashes before your eyes and all the mistakes that you've made. For Peter Parker, is looking back on like the death of Gwen Stacy at the hand of Norman Osborn. Now, this is significant because of the fact that while he is visiting Uncle Ben, while he is seeing these various people, he's whisked away by Norman Osborn. And so what this does is it hits home at the idea that the tried and true villain of Peter Parker, really more so than anything else, is Norman Osborn himself. Norman Osborn has almost always been there. Norman Osborn has taken some of the most significant members of Peter Parker's life, Gwen Stacy being a perfect example. It's this representation that Peter Parker has constantly failed, and the Green Goblin manifests in that form, that Peter Parker will never find happiness, that he'll never be free of his life of Spider-Man. And this hits on a couple different things. In a lot of ways, Peter is his own worst enemy when it comes to trying to live a normal life. His moral compass is the roadblock in his path to try to live a normal life. One of the big deals with regards to the Renew Your Vows story in Secret Wars was that gave us a scenario whereby a guy named the Regent rose up and then fought all the different superheroes, and Peter Parker walked away because Mary Jane and his daughter were in jeopardy. And so because of that, he ended up, saving the life of those he cared about, or at least saving the life of Mary Jane, and killed Venom in the process. But in return, all the major superheroes were killed by Regent. Peter Parker walked away from being a superhero to save those he cared about. That's not something that we would normally see. That's why that story was so huge, and it was like, wow. I mean, it was so groundbreaking because Peter Parker will go to the bitter end in order to, be a superhero, to play the role of a superhero. He'll worry about his family first, but he's not one to keep his head down. Even if he's the last superhero fighting, even if he's the last guy, he'll take pot shots, he'll put his mind to task, whatever the case may be, he'll always keep coming back in an effort to try to win the day. And so that's one of the big things about this, is because this kind of gives us a story whereby we see Peter Parker doing the best that he can, having to go, alongside Dr. Octopus, submit himself to this particular scenario. But again, it's constantly this idea that he'll never be able to find happiness. It's constantly this idea that his own moral compass gets in the way. His need to be a superhero, his desire to do the right thing, is ultimately what keeps him from being able to walk away from being a superhero at all. So these are some of the significant moments that we saw in this particular story. Now, the other half of this is that, of course, we end up having Dr. Octopus sort of engineer this entire calamity, whereby he has, Stunner essentially notify the cops that Dr. Octopus is here, kind of turning himself in, more or less. The cops show up, they arrest him, and they sort of call it a day. Now, again, Dr. Octopus knows he's going to get out of here. I mean, he knows he's going to get away. He's going to be able to engineer his own escape. That's not going to be a great, big, huge deal. That's the expectation. But what we end up finding out is the best laid plans of mice and men. It doesn't work out that way. Ultimately, Dr. Octopus is sought out by Kaine, and Kaine essentially kills Dr. Octopus. I mean, he just absolutely tears him apart, takes him out step by step. Now, the crazy thing about this is Dr. Octopus is very human here. He's not a villain. He's not a bad guy. How dare you step on my turf? How dare you try to, invade my life? Not at all. Dr. Octopus's main concern is, where is Stunner? Where's the woman that I love? And that's what's so cool about this, is much like Superior Spider-Man, it grounded him. It made him a guy that we can relate to in a lot of ways, because because this is not Dr. Octopus the villain, this is Otto Octavius the person trying to find the love of his life, concerned more about her than he is about himself. Now, of course, again, this leads to him being killed by Kaine, which of course, the Stunner's there to sort of mourn him, and that leads into the actual funeral for Dr. Octopus himself. But at this point, we transition over to the whole idea of Peter Parker and where things go next. With regards to Peter himself, the prospect of Mary Jane Watson being pregnant introduces a lot of scenarios that are relatively dangerous for him. That was really the whole basis behind, renew your vows. And that's why stories like that have their roots in Clone Saga. Because with Peter Parker looking at Mary Jane Watson and realizing that she's pregnant, being told that she's pregnant, it introduces the notion that now there's somebody else there. There's somebody else as part of this bigger picture. There's a child to raise, and he's not going to put his child in harm's way. He has no intention of doing that. At the same time, Ben Reilly approaches Spider-Man and says, look, I gotta quit. I gotta walk away. I have to be done with all this, because Ben Reilly's kind of living in the shadow of Peter Parker, right? That was the whole basis behind Spider-Man: The Lost Years. It's this idea that Ben Reilly, from the time that he survived in Amazing Spider-Man number 149, and really the time that he was created, leading up to this point right here, he's constantly been in the shadow of Peter Parker. He's never been his own man. He's never been able to sit down and say, I'm my own guy. I've had my own experiences. I am definitively a wholly different person. At the end of the day, the memories he has are the memories of Peter Parker. They're not his own. They're not memories he experienced when he was 5 years old. They're not memories he experienced when he was 10 years old. When he remembers, Gwen Stacy being killed, that's not an experience he had. It's an experience that was given to him just by virtue of being cloned. And so this whole idea sets the stage for the possibility of Ben Reilly going off, being his own character, getting his own stories outside of the existing Spider-Man stories. Now, at the same time, Peter looks around the entire scenario, looks back on his own memories, and realizes the life that he has coming for him later on down the line, and ultimately makes a decision that he's going to throw away the idea of being Spider-Man. For him, he's got a life to live. This is the moment at which Marvel began the process of trying to write Peter Parker out, or at least they intended to, by basically having Peter Parker say, look, I've got a much bigger life to live here. I can't simply allow myself to be Spider-Man anymore, because my role as a superhero, should anybody learn my identity, would put my family in jeopardy. Not only that, he looks at the life that he could have had. He looks at the experiences that he gained with Aunt May, all those different situations, and says, I want to be that person. I want to be that dad. I want to be the dad that I never had. I want to pass the lessons on that I gained from Uncle Ben to my child. Now, a lot of this is also sort of poked and prodded by Aunt May, just because of the fact that with Aunt May facing the prospect of death, Peter Parker is forced to realize that life is short. And that's one of the reasons why this is so cool, is because in this moment when Aunt May, her favor basically begins to come back, and the idea is that Aunt May is going to die, Peter Parker kind of, begins to realize, look, tomorrow's promised to no man. It's the same experience that anybody has when they lose someone close to them. You're forced to basically realize that life is too short. You don't get second chances. Do everything that you can now, because there is no chance to do it over again. You don't get to take two. You are born into this world, you pass away, and that's it. I don't mean to say that to make it sound cynical or anything. It's just, that's always how I've kind of looked at it, And so because of this, it's really kind of a great moment, because when Aunt May officially passes away, this is when Peter Parker is at his most base, his most human, because remember, Aunt May was the source of everything. Uncle Ben was huge. Losing Uncle Ben was a huge moment, but it's what set Peter Parker on the path of becoming Spider-Man. Losing Aunt May, he might as well have lost his whole world. She's the cornerstone of everything that he values. It's losing his mom for all intents and purposes. And so in these moments when he's forced to basically experience this entire situation, he effectively intends to sit down and say, I'm done. I'm done being Spider-Man. I'm gonna go live my life. I've been a superhero long enough. I fought alongside the Avengers long enough. I've given enough. I've lost enough. It's time for me to go live my life. Everybody else will be okay. Ben Reilly, the Scarlet Spider, he can just take over. He can just be the new Spider-Man. It's not a great big huge deal. We look the same anyway, so as far as anybody knows that knows us individually, knows us as people, nothing's going to be the same to them. He has all my same memories. So you guys see where Marvel was going with this idea of removing Peter Parker and replacing him with Ben Reilly. The issue with this is that before any of that can happen, because of these murders that Kaine has been going around and committing, the police pick up on Peter Parker. Because remember, Kaine and Peter Parker, at least this was the first indication, Kaine, as we know now, is a clone of Peter Parker. And so because of this, the fingerprints that Kaine's been leaving behind are Peter Parker's fingerprints. To all individuals who are investigating this, the identity of the person who's committed these crimes is Peter Parker himself. And so Peter Parker's tossed in the paddy wagon and hauled off to jail. And what this does is set the stage for the entire, trial of Peter Parker himself and the revelation of who Kaine is, where Kaine came from, and ultimately who it is behind all these clones that are cropping up with regards to the Spider-Man landscape. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.